إذا قلتم زوجي دفين زركز እግዚአብሔር ካባል ሁሉ ይሞ ለዛው ዲዚአ ሲንኪያ ወይ
كند مريت كوينه كند خبر حزبي كند خبر حزبي كند خبر حزبي كند ولودو تاعت كننا أصحابي كننا أصحابي كننا أصحابي عدلكم وفيكم زمزحكم عدلي زمزحكم عدلي زمزحكم عدلي أنتم تقعدتي أنتم مقعدتك كبرتها بلك كبرتها بلك أنت تقعدلي أنت تقعدلي أنت تقعدلي أنت تقعدلي أسمعكم حاولتي أبقى زي بالي أبقى زي بالي أبقى زي بالي أنا ونايد اليوم نعقم زي دلي نعقم زي دلي نعقم زي دلي أنتم سبت تاريخي أنتم سبت تاريخي أنتم سبت مالي أنتم سبت مالي أتت عمي أتغد معامي أتغد معامي أتغد معامي أستنتن لي حسب ليلومي حسب ليلومي ذكر الليلومي لدك عمي دك غد معامي دك غد معامي دك غد معامي أستنتن وهم ذكر وملومي ذكر وملومي نبي غيوم لومي أنا بالمريحة رواد الساقرت رواد الساقرت رواد الساقرت دباب صندق نيرت راس حلت نيرت راس حلت نيرت راس حلت تعمل حلون ريمن حمق زي الحالت حمق زي الحالت حمق زي الحالت نافر حات عبدبو كل عزي تنبرت كل عزي تنبرت كل عزي تنبرت كبرت يا حابلي كبرت يا حابلي ناي كبرات كبرات ناي كبرات كبرت أبكي زيز خبرو بعل ورك رفرف بعل ورك رفرف بعل ورك رفرف زنان بعل زنان لعليكم زي حلف لعليكم زي حلف لعليكم زي حلف تاريخ دو يتفن ترفوق حلف انت الفوق حلف انت الفوق حلف تاريخ دو يتعلق تاريخ دو يتعلق انت الفوق نسافر انت الفوق نسافر عطت عمي اتغد معامي اتغد معامي اتغد معامي استنتن لي حسب ليلومي حسب ليلومي ذكر الليلومي ندك عمي دك غد معامي دك غد معامي دك غد معامي أستنتن وهم ذكر وملومي ذكر وملومي نافي غيوم لومي دك غد معامي دك غد معامي أستنتن وهم ذكر وملومي ذكر وملومي نافي غيوم لومي مهلا وزر لوم مهلا بعل ويلالي وقا مني بعل ويلالي أنت ويلالي مهلا ويلو مهلا وكبري مهلا وكبري وقا مني قبزاي نبري قبزاي نبري وقا مني قبزاي نبري زانتا سمالي دك عمي دك غدم عمي دك غدم عمي دك غدم عمي عسنت نوم ذكر ولومي ذكر ولومي نافي خيام لومي مهلا ويبلوم مهلا ولومي مهلا ولومي وقع مني وبعل ويلالي بعل ويلالي وقع مني وبعل ويلالي أنت ويلالي مهلا ويبلوم مهلا وكبري مهلا وكبري وقع مني وقبزاي نبري قبزاي نبري وقع مني وقبزاي نبري زانتا زمالي
Thank you, everybody, for that beautiful opening music by legendary Akilu Tafano. And with that, يقنيلنا solo بإنجليش بتقرينيا جرنا لومي program مدبنا مسألكم دلنا مسانا لومي هذا كابتوم ننوح عمتات نإرترا بوليتيكا نتختاتل بزح مصنعتي جيرو صبو جيرو نتي جيوبوليتكس نا عالم زفلطو غاشانا كبور توماس ماونتن عديمنا لكم علينا. And with that, I'm going to say hello everybody, happy new year to everybody, and our guest today, Thomas Mountain, and he's going to be talking to us about geopolitics and some other issues related to Eritrea. We'd love to always bring Thomas and his outlook, his fresh perspective on the region. The Horn of Africa region is always a great way for us to understand some of the untold analysis. So with that said, welcome to our show. And how have you been, Thomas? And tell us a little bit what you've been doing for the last couple of months.
Well, it's good to be back. We've been just chilling here in Lynchburg, taking great grandchildren and keeping up with what's going on in the Horn of Africa.
Well, we're going to start off with something that you tweeted a couple of days ago, and it literally sums up everything, I guess, in a nutshell. The tweet is, to me, I think sums it up, if I'm not mistaken. Let's put it out there and so everybody can see it. I don't know if we have the tweet, but it was a very good message. There it is. So elaborate a little bit about that tweet. I really found it to be fascinating. So go ahead and talk a little bit about that.
Well, we were hearing reports that three Azerbaijan ships were intercepted by the Eritrean Navy in Eritrean waters, and that the reports were saying we have this unconfirmed reports, but this is from usually reliable sources that their ships were carrying arms. Well, if they were carrying arms, then Eritrea was going to impound these arms. That's just makes sense, because if it's Azerbaijan, they're taking arms where? Well, they're taking to Djibouti to deliver them to Ethiopia, and Azerbaijan receives a lot of support from Turkey. So these are probably pretty high-tech weapons that Eritrea can definitely use. But again, it's like there's been no official announcements about arms or anything like that. So it's speculation, but I think it's reasonable speculation to say that these are arms that were in these ships. Because where else? Why would Azerbaijan ships be coming down to Djibouti?
Absolutely, and so the whole thing is, there are weapons. Also, there's a lot of legalities that go around it, and several articles have been written. Even the Embassy of Eritrea has already sent out a press release, and also there was a couple of good articles written by a couple of people that I know very well, and they know the legalities of the whole situation. And so many articles of legalities were broken in how it happened. And the government of Eritrea most of the time does not like to utter words. They're action oriented. And so I think with what you say, it makes a lot of sense. But the other positive thing about this is every time weapons come into a region, every time there's a problem, every time there's something like that going on, it's likely going to be used on the public that's there in that region. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand. And that's what the problem that we've faced over the years are. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? And we'll also have, what the General Bainak chime in a little bit on that. But go ahead and elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, we know that Turkey has been very supportive, militarily very supportive of Azerbaijan. Turkish drones were the decisive factor in Azerbaijan defeating the Armenians in the war they had a few years ago. So there's a strong military link between Turkey and Azerbaijan, and the Bakhtiar drones that Turkey provides them are very valuable to them. And we know that Ethiopia has been buying drones, usually financed by the United Arab Emirates, UAE. But, so UAE is probably financing all of this. And, Azerbaijan's deniability factor for Turkey, Azerbaijan sending the drones to Ethiopia. That's the most, lucid scenario, what's going on here. Again, Eritrea never says anything about these sort of interceptions. I mean, the brief statements to confirm that they've actually intercepted these ships, but they're not going to talk about what they were carrying or, but by now all the arms have been unloaded, the Eritreans distributing them to their military. And so, hey, like I said, thank you, Azerbaijan, for your donation of these high-tech weapons to Eritrea. We need them.
Absolutely. I think they tend to forget a little bit about the Eritrean history of, when we started our struggle, most people know that, even though now it's not talked about more, we had nothing. We took away the enemy's weapon, and that's how we actually won our wars. And so these people sometimes tend to forget the strength of Eritrea, especially today, after all those years of experience and ability to do a lot of different things. But the great part about it is Eritrea seems to be the most ethical nation in terms of whatever the problems are. Eritrea doesn't fall to the problem. We're very ethical, and I think what we do is always the right thing to save lives, but at the same time to protect ourselves in a good way. So, the weapons. Go ahead. I'll give you.
Well, the strength of Eritrea is not so much the weapons; it's the people. I mean, the people, they're united, they're conscious, and they'll tolerate just incredible, to overcome the trials of the Eritrean people have faced. And that's the thing that impressed me in the 15 years I lived in Eritrea, was that the Eritrean people are really, it's not just consciousness, it's the strength of the Eritrean people, the unity of the Eritrean people. We got there in 2006, and they'd been through the first 2-year drought in history, 2003, 2004. And this is just when Eritrea was recovering from the TPLF invasion of 2000, which displaced 40% of the Eritrean population. 40% of the Eritrean population was displaced. Can you imagine here in the United States if 40% of the population was displaced? You're talking about 130 million people were just in a matter of a week or two were driven from their homes with their clothes on their back. So Eritrea had been through all this just like 5 or 6 years before we got there. And then, shortly after we got there, the next year, 2008, 2 years after we got there, Eritrea was hit by another 2-year drought. So there was, back-to-back 2-year droughts, which the country has never seen before. And Eritrea has been an agriculturally based economy. So to have all the rainfall, agriculture fail twice within a few years was a major challenge. And then the United States, through the UN Insecurity Council, put these illegal sanctions on Eritrea to cripple Eritrea further. And, so Eritrea was getting hammered when we got there. And it just got worse and worse and worse. The Eritrean people were just really tolerating some really hard times. The electric cuts, water coming once a month, this life is hard, and so that's what I've been impressed the strength of the Eritrean people and how they can, they're not gonna just give up.
And if I could pose you, that's the majority of the people which is in Eritrea, and those who have been able to withstand all this. And you have a few people outside of the country who try to use that sanction, the problem, and everything else that comes with it as being a country that's not managed well, a country that's not able to do this. And that's what the media feeds off of, and they start attacking people and attacking the country directly, the president. And lately, as you know, we have this one so-called, Yale expert who graduated with biology with undergrad and got a PhD in some kind of, his name is Michael Rubin. I don't even want to mention his name, but, they create this think tanks, American Enterprise Institute, Brookings, this, that, and they start writing as if they're forming opinion of the world. And so these are the kind of things that, you can see that the attack directly has been on the people, on the country, and especially on the president lately, if you notice. And every time they attack on the president, we get stronger. People don't understand there's millions of President Isaias out there. And that's one of the things that I kind of want you to kind of elaborate on a little bit, because you lived there. You saw everything. You saw not just, you didn't just live there and sit there and write or whatever. You lived the actual life. You went to the countryside. You did a lot of things. So let's talk a little bit about that too while we got you, because we never get a chance to talk about those things.
Well, I call them liars for hire. And they trot out these guys. They come and they go. You've had Tabor Nagy and now this Michael Rubin. Before then, we had other people everybody from the School of Oriental and African Studies saying that it's not a question of when, but not a question of if, but when Eritrea is going to collapse. And, we've had the crisis management or crisis group saying, Eritrea is, it's going to failed state. And, this has been going on practically since we got to Eritrea in 2006. So it's a sort of a regular procession of liars for hire, paid lackeys. Their job is to try to scare investment off and damage the Eritrean people's morale in the diaspora. The Eritrean diaspora has been critical to support the country. The hundreds of millions of dollars every year that Eritrean diaspora has contributed to their government has kept the country, helped the country survive. It's been critical. So, whatever they can do to hassle and impede the diaspora from supporting the country, they will. So, they use their I call them their mainstream media to get out there and spread these lies. We've heard it for a long time. And in general, my position is like, don't give these guys free publicity. We just, if they're going to say it, they're going to say it. And, our job is to, get a grasp of what's really going on and don't pay any attention to these guys. These guys are liars for hire.
Absolutely. Now, so let me ask you this now. As you know, new administration is coming into this country. I know sometimes we always get excited because, hey, at least we got somebody that may not, be more aggressive as the previous administration. But the actual system, the political system, and the way things are done are most of the time very similar. However, if we see changes now, what kind of changes do you expect from this new administration that's coming in, President Trump? And what do you see? Any foreseeable future that could maybe make things better in the Horn of Africa region?
Well, Trump is, for one, it's hard to predict Trump. He's very volatile. He posted up Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Sachs's interview recently, where Sachs called Netanyahu a dark son of a bitch.
Yeah.
And what? And I was like, I thought, this must have been a mistake, because the interview started off with, Sachs talking about Barack Obama, being very critical of Barack Obama and helping start ISIS and Daesh. But Trump didn't invite Netanyahu to his inauguration. And on top of that, the Israeli media, the Israeli leadership, these war criminal leadership of Israel has been complaining about the fact that Trump is forcing them to accept a ceasefire deal with Hamas. They want to continue the genocide. And Trump seems like he's doing something to put an end to it. And based upon how, how rabid Trump has been supporting of Israel, this has come as a complete shock for, Trump to come on and I guess he personally must hate Netanyahu. Of course, everybody pretty much hates Netanyahu. But
well, they've had an issue before. I know that he said he advised him on something. He never responded back. But having said that, at least the best part about Trump from previous experience was that he doesn't meddle in other people's affairs, and I think that kind of benefits us also as a nation, because that's what we've been asking everybody. We just we want to be left alone as a country. We want to be able to develop our economy. We want to be able to build. That's what Eritrea has all along been asking. It doesn't matter who the leadership is here, but the way that we are relating in communications or in terms of relationships has been very, very bizarre over the last few years. It's been up and down, and I'm hoping that there's at least a good opportunity for Eritrea to get better in terms of economic development going forward. It is going to, no matter what, but it makes life easier, is what I'm saying. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about how do you feel in the next, I'd say probably in the next 5 years, in the 5-year span, how do you feel Eritrea's role as a peacemaker or in being a peaceful place will play in the Horn of Africa region?
Well, Eritrea is, I for many years, I've said all roads to peace in the Horn of Africa run through Asmara. And there's been so many examples of that, it's over and over again. I mean, they're right now in Sudan, a few days ago, the Egyptian foreign minister said that Eritrea is involved in supporting General Burhan's army. Now, people were sort of suspected that going back several months when the tide started to turn, when the Sudanese army under General Burhan's leadership started to become more successful and take the offensive. And in the last month or so, it's been dramatic. And so, there were a lot of people, I wouldn't say a lot of people, there were people who have been suspecting that Eritrea's been involved because there's just sudden turnaround like this. And, the Egyptian foreign minister has come out and said that Eritrea is involved in, quote unquote, training the Sudanese. So, I mean, it's clear there's been a big turnaround as Sudanese armies become effective. This foreign intervention by the UAE on behalf supporting General Hemeti and his rebellion, attempted coup, just like UAE supporting the gangster regime in Ethiopia headed by Abiy Ahmed. This is foreign intervention in the Horn of Africa, and Eritrea has been responding to it. And I think this bodes well for eventual bringing peace to Sudan and ending this insane civil war that's been going on. So, Eritrea's active involvement in bringing peace to the Horn of Africa. Now, this is part and parcel of Eritrea has to develop its own economy. It has to become strong and self-sufficient. And, the PFDJ, the Popular Front for Democracy and Justice, which is the offshoot of the EPLF, Eritrean People's Liberation Front, is going to be holding its 4th Congress is coming here. And they're going to be laying out, for the Eritrean people to see and study, develop what they see is coming up. And basically for the next 10 years. And, what's going to happen in Eritrea. And a part of that, they'll be laying out, what the foreign policy is going to be, what the domestic policy is going to be, so I think there's going to be, this next year is going to be a turning point for Eritrea. I mean, Eritrean people are still suffering. I mean, there's still lack of electricity, there's still lack of water, and the economy is still struggling. But, the good thing is the mining industry is now beginning to step up, and the funds for the mining industry. Yes?
That it's taken off. And it's funny you mentioned that, because I was going to tell you one of the things that the principles, which most people still don't understand, is that, the EPLF had a charter and it transferred into the PFDJ, like you said, and the PFDJ charter, towards the end of it, there were 6 charters, and I believe one of them was to create regional peace, regional integration, regional peace, and all that was part of the, the charter. And it is a very important part of the piece of the puzzle for us to see the end of the light, the end of the tunnel, the light of the tunnel, right? So with that said, how about further down on the other side with Somalia? And I know, we've worked with them recently, but also this whole Somaliland issue and Abiy and the things that have developed in the last few weeks, where Abiy's finally accepted that he can't just go in there and have access to the sea like he wants to. So can you talk a little bit about that as well, once you elaborate a little bit on the Sudanese, if you're finished with the Sudanese topic?
Well, the Abiy regime is going to fall. It's not if, it's when. And I wasn't sure if it even last to the end of 2024. Things are very shaky. I mean, he's got an armed rebellion led by the Amhara Fano army now, which all four branches are now apparently united and coordinating their actions. Abiy just announced that they're bringing in armed drones to patrol Addis Ababa. In other words, Abiy's worried about Fano being able to operate openly in Addis Ababa and prepare for running him off, chasing him back to, become a resident of Mengistu's guest cottage in Zimbabwe. So, things are pretty shaky in Ethiopia, and Abiy's not. I don't think how long he's going to last. I don't know. He's continuing to be propped up by external forces. The Europeans are still supporting him. UAE supports him. So, but things are just going from bad to worse in Ethiopia. I mean, benzene prices up, fuel prices and electric prices are just skyrocketing. And so, inflation, there's no foreign currency. Abiy is, getting wheat from Russia and God knows what he's doing, selling it to get cash to feather his nest and, or, pay for his exile or whatever. But I mean, Abiy's been flailing around trying to find a way to divert popular discontent with his leadership of the country. We're going to get the Red Sea back for us, and we're going to have a port in Somalia and all this stuff. This is all basically propaganda on Abiy's part, for public consumption. It's just none of it's realistic. It's not going to happen. I mean, who knows? Maybe the Somali leadership is going to, make some concessions to Abiy, but I mean, he is not in a position to come in and fund the port. I mean, maybe the UAE is going to pay for it, but the Somali people, I don't think they're going to accept it. I mean, the Somalis and Ethiopia are historically enemies. So to have Ethiopia army inside Somalia once again, I don't see the Somali people accepting it. So, I don't know about Somalia. It's a very complicated situation. I mean, you've got this importation of large numbers of Daesh or jihadists into Puntland, northern Somalia. And, Puntland, the army is having to go up and wipe these guys out because they're foreigners. They're not Somalis. And it's going to bring terrorism to their region. So, there's a lot of destabilizing foreign, who's paying for these guys? How can they come down there from all over these countries like, Syria and Libya and these other places and destabilize Somalia? So Somalia is, a very complicated, fractious country with a history of, Somalia's never historically really had a king. The first real leader of United Somalia was Siad Barre, who was one of the great Pan-Africanists in the post-World War II era. And, what's going on in Somalia is very complicated, and what's going to happen is tough. I mean, Eritrea has been training the Somali security forces, trying to drive out Al-Shabaab, where they've been getting their money from. I mean, the former head of intelligence for Somalia said that Al-Shabaab's been getting their money from the Arabs. So, I mean, this is like, there's external interference in Somalia. There's an external interference in Sudan. There's external interference in Ethiopia. So Eritrea is there working hard to try to stabilize the Horn of Africa. And, all roads to peace in the Horn of Africa run through Asmara. So, I mean, the big hope right now we're having is that Sudan is going to have peace, because Sudan's a large country, and this has just been a disaster. And Eritrea has been, these are our neighbors, and to have Sudan, just millions of people starving and warfare, and this big problem is Eritrea really was benefiting with trade and commerce with Sudan, and have all that collapse. And, in Ethiopia to go, become hostile again after what it looked like was going to be peace in 2018. Again, the big neighbor next to Eritrea is to have civil war and look like it might be breaking up. So, Eritrea is working hard. There's no question. They're trying to stabilize the Horn of Africa. And now that we've confirmed that Eritrea is involved in, supporting General Burhan militarily, hopefully that's going to be see an end of Hemeti and the UAE's intervention in Sudan and bring peace to Sudan, which God knows the Sudanese people need.
Right. Where do you put South Sudan in this?
Well, South Sudan is sort of like a failed state. I mean, they've finally got their oil fields running again, and but there's so much corruption, and they haven't been able to to really stabilize their country and their economy. So they're still pretty much dependent on a lot of foreign aid. So it's hard to say that they're, what the future, but, I wrote a lot about how the CIA was funding the civil war in South Sudan. Mm-hmm. And I think it's about the only one that really said this. And they tried to ignore me, but so, after TPLF was driven from national power, the civil war just came to a stop because there was nobody funneling money back into to Riek Machar's army. So he had to make a deal. So South Sudan, I don't know, where it's headed, but at least there's a light at the end of the tunnel now in Sudan.
Right. Let me ask you this. So, you just mentioned that, you used to say a lot of things. You used to write a lot of things. I remember in the high days, and some of your articles used to get shunned, but I followed them very closely, and some of them made a lot of sense. Now you see it, and you see how things developed, and the TPLF obviously was the central figure that brought all the bad apples together, right? And so because they were allowed to do whatever they wanted to do, and now that they're gone, do you think the fraction between the peoples of Ethiopia is also a problem? How do we solve the issue of the Horn of Africa by bringing? I know you said all roads to peace start in Asmara. How do we get Asmara to become like the central figure or an example? And like I know it's being called a thread of good example, but how do you get Asmara to become a shining example for the region? Because every which way you look at it, every angle you go to in the region, there's always something, and somebody from outside is a part of it. And so how do we change that mindset to change Africa? And you see what's going on in West Africa as well. If you could touch up a little bit on that, in Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger and all this, and even Chad recently is, changing. So how does all that fall into place? If you could just summarize it for our listeners, our people who are watching.
Well, the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, was headed for a long time by Meles Zenawi, who was basically recruited by a CIA agent named Gail Smith, who went on to become the special advisor to Barack Obama, head of USAID. She was a senior member of the American National Intelligence. So Meles was basically an agent for them, and they pumped him up, kept him in power with tens of billions of dollars in aid. So, when Abiy came in, we thought that was going to change, but then turned out Abiy was just another gangster regime fighting for power. It's Ethiopia is a little bit. The thing is, Eritrea is working behind the scenes. They're not going to sit back. They never sat back. They don't talk about it. They keep it all very close to their vest, and it's rare that you hear anything about it, but it does come out once in a while. But Eritrea, is working hard. And I've gotten flack for saying Eritrea supports Fano. Well, we had family that was living in refugee camps in Tigray, and they saw Eritrea providing support to Fano. Especially back when Fano was first getting started, when the TPLF tried their coup d'état at the end of 2020. So it makes sense that Eritrea would support Fano, the one armed force that would potentially bring peace to Ethiopia and get rid of Abiy and all of these gangsters that he's got in power. And, how many millions of people have been displaced? How many millions of people are starving? All this massive destruction that's taken place. And Abiy's now, clearly bent down and licking the boots of the Western powers. So, Eritrea, they've got a plan. They're working on it. And it's not something that we know about yet, but it'll in the future, it's going to come out. And, Eritrea is not going to sit back and let Ethiopia just disintegrate. That's going to be a disaster for the whole Horn of Africa and Eritrea especially, because if Ethiopia disintegrates, then you're going to have all these jihadists. And, the American policy is, if we can't control you, we want to destroy you. We'd rather have chaos and, so better so we can loot and plunder your economy. And what the Americans don't want is a strong nationalist, independent governments in Africa, especially in the Horn of Africa. So, the Americans have, will just as soon see Ethiopia disintegrate if they can't control it. So I think Eritrea's got a plan for this, and they're implementing those plans. And like they always do, it's just not something they talk about publicly.
Absolutely. No, it's very important, because if Ethiopia is to be dismantled, it's going to be a big, big problem, because it's never been in a situation where it has been dismantled for many years. And the reason was because of the protection that it had, and us being one of the biggest countries in the region, right? However, looking at it though, now we know nobody expected, like the three countries I mentioned earlier going further west, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, even now going to Chad, like I said. The threat of good example, which Hillary talked about, was worrisome to her, because she didn't want Eritrea to be the threat of good example, because if Eritrea is a good example, everybody else will be like Eritrea. And now we're starting to see changes similar to what's been going on in Eritrea for since the independence, right? And so, with that said, how do you look at the geopolitics of Africa in general, and in relation to Eritrea, and also to the region of the Horn of Africa?
Well, the uprising against the French colonialism that's broken out in the last few years in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger has become, undeniable. I mean, the French have been expelled, and even now they're expelled out of Chad too. This is basically a big disaster for France. I mean, started off with a rebellion by the Azawad people, the Tuareg people in Mali, and because the West had destroyed Libya in this war against Libya, they this arms flow, just incredible arms from Libya down into Central and West Africa, which destabilized all these governments. So basically all these governments were basically lackeys to the French. I mean, they didn't even produce their own money. All their gold that they produced all went into the French treasury. I mean, these governments were basically under the control of the French, and it's been that way since what they called independence. So, this is all, and then you had this outbreak of where the jihad, the Daesh, especially in Mali, with the superior arms they had from Libya, were able to defeat the Tuareg, the Azawad people, and almost overthrow the Mali government. So the French intervened militarily, but what they didn't do was they didn't suppress these guys. These Daesh, these jihadists in Mali were actually working with the French. The French were protecting them. I mean, at one point the French drove them up into a town in northern Mali and had them trapped there, and then let them go because they needed an excuse to keep their military in Mali. Well, finally the Mali people, the people of Burkina Faso, the people of Niger have got fed up and told the French, they run the French off. So, now that seems like that's what's happening in Chad too now. Chad, of course, is, of all of them, Chad has been almost the most militarily dominated by the French. But, even now you've got Senegal saying, well, the French has to get all their army out. And the pressure is even coming down on Ouattara and Ivory Coast to get the French out. So, I mean, these are big changes coming about. French imperialism is, taking some major blows. But, the French are basically subservient to the United States geopolitically. So, the United States, in one way, doesn't mind French being kicked out because they hope to get their hooks in these countries. But, what I'm hoping is that these countries are going to pay attention to the good example Eritrea plays. And, I've been pushing a lot of these so-called Pan-Africanist organizations on the internet to come on, you guys have got to play a role in pointing out, there's really only one way to build self-sufficiency and independence. You've got to have food security for national security. You have to nationalize your industries. You have to nationalize your land. You're going to have to, the people of these West African countries are going to have to develop their economies independent of the West. And they can't be looking for handouts. Like I say, we said Eritrea is the threat of a good example. Well, if they follow Eritrea's example, they'll be successful. They don't have to follow it exactly, but the basic points that Eritrea has done in developing their country, and maintaining an independent foreign policy and focusing on the critical role of food security in their countries. These are the steps that have to be taken in West Africa. And if they continue on this course, which looks like they are, if they continue, then they'll be successful. But they really, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Eritrea has been doing this for over 30 years through some really, really tough times and been successful, especially for a small country like Eritrea, facing up against the United States. So Eritrea is, I'm hoping that these governments are looking to Eritrea and learning from Eritrea's example. I really haven't seen any of them talk about any of this, and I'm sort of disappointed in some of the so-called friends of Eritrea that, supposed to be, they go to these. They went to was it Burkina Faso, and and they never even raised Eritrea. I mean, some of them went down to Kenya and talked about Malcolm X. I mean, right. What are you talking about, Malcolm X? Why don't you talk about Isaias Afwerki? These are people that have been. Yeah, I mean,
they don't get paid to do that.
Isaias Afwerki in Kenya and educate the Kenyan people and say, look, here's a leader. If you got a leader like this in Kenya, man, you're gonna turn things around. What's Malcolm X got to do with Africa? I mean, Malcolm X was a revolutionary, not even that revolutionary, Black American, and so for Black Americans, yeah, okay, but for Africans. I mean, right. We got a role model right next door to Kenya and Eritrea. Why don't they talk about this? So, what I'm hoping is that the word spreads. You've got a leader like Isaias Afwerki that is, a role model for the rest of Africa. And, part of the things that Isaias is doing is he's working hard to develop Eritrea in the economy. So the rest of Africans are going to look at Eritrea, which they're starting to do, and say, how come we can't be like that? How come we can't all have free education and decent medical care and housing and water and food and peaceful society? Why are we always in this chaos and failed state status? So, what I'm hoping is that, that's the thread of a good example spreads.
Yes. So the funny part you mentioned is, I follow Instagram, and sometimes I believe they're on YouTube, called Africa Stream, and they brought President Isaias Afwerki's speeches from some of his meetings a few times, and people are starting to really pay attention to that. But apparently, recently the State Department sanctioned that that stream. It's called Africa Stream because it tells a lot of great stories, unheard stories that and it includes every Black community around the world. So there you go. Every time somebody speaks about somebody, they're going to try to suppress the voice. But having said that, what do you think of, going to more international now? What do you think of the Russian and the Chinese role in Africa, and especially in our region? And, obviously people are scared. And one of the reasons that actually they sanctioned, the State Department claimed they sanctioned that Africa Stream was because it's propagating Russian propaganda. And so, it's very funny how they come up with small things like that to derail information, So let's talk a little bit about the whole geopolitics, Russia, China, other things that you may have.
Well, when Isaias, went to the Russian African conference, basically summit, he said that the West has been waging a 30-year-long war against Russia, and that it's about time Russia finally started fighting back, in this case in Ukraine, defending themselves. And that he said straight up, Russia's got to lead this international struggle against hegemony. Because, look, China is still so heavily integrated into the U.S. economy and the Western economy. They're not in a position where they can break with the Western economy without causing all kind of, dysfunction within their own internal society in China. China's working hard to develop domestic consumption so they're not dependent on the export market to the West. But in the meantime, they're not in a position they can do what Russia's doing. And Russia's basically cut itself loose from the West, and now Russia is the Russian economy is growing while the Western economies are collapsing, especially the European economy. So, China has got a major role economically to play in Africa and in Eritrea. Russia has a major political role, a military role to play in Africa to support these new African movements and to support Eritrea. Now, on the other hand, you've got the State Department, and the mainstream media in the United States attacking the voices of African independence, like the African Stream, and Blinken coming right out and admitting that African Stream has been a thorn in the U.S. and hegemony side. But, Russia has created something called Sputnik Africa. And I've been starting to speak out about it, because what is this Sputnik Africa? Why aren't they talking about Eritrea? I mean, here you got Eritrea doing all this food security, this water conservation, which is a role model for the rest of Africa that's getting hammered by droughts and famine. How come they're not talking about this? This is Sputnik Africa. They're supposed to be reflecting reality in Africa today. How come they're not holding Eritrea up as a role model? The other day they did something about some giant cake they made in Kenya. What is this kind of, I said, what planet do they live on? So, Russia, I think, could do a lot better job. They could put somebody in charge of Sputnik Africa that was actually, in touch with reality in Africa and looking for role models to promote for the rest of Africa. China Global Television, they're not a whole lot better. They're not like promoting Eritrea. When's the last time you saw a positive story about anything important in Eritrea on CGTN? So, these countries could do a lot better job of, promoting Eritrea and promoting positive role models in Africa. So, I'm disappointed.
If I could interject, as a media person myself before, do you feel like maybe some of those networks have been infiltrated with some people who are, I had a tough time working for even an alternative media, which I worked for, which I would rather not mention the name, but it's difficult sometimes to get a story out there that benefits certain people. So that maybe, do you think there's a fear or editorial judgments, that kind of thing? What do you think?
Well, I don't understand how it is that Sputnik Africa would be infiltrated by the CIA, or, but somehow whoever's running Sputnik Africa, they don't respond to any of, at one point I was the most widely distributed independent journalist in Africa. And, they just ignore voices that, so I understand I don't understand what's going on there. And the same thing with CGTN, the Chinese Global Television. How come they're not covering these very positive stories that are coming out of Eritrea? So, the Chinese government has recognized it. How come their media people aren't doing so? So, I've worked, like you, I've worked a long time in the media. At one point, 25 years ago, I was like the voice in the wilderness. The only voice out there is telling the truth about what was going on in Eritrea and this attempt by the West to destroy Eritrea. And, for a long time, I worked with I used to be called radical left liberal sites like Counterpunch to get the truth out. Right. So, but that's all, like Counterpunch has basically become pro-war and has supports the, U.S. NATO war against Russia. And so, there's not a lot of voices left. The United States runs Sputnik Radio off, so I don't even get, a small voice on Sputnik Radio anymore. So, right. How this is the first interview I've done in quite a while. So, how are they going to
thank you.
Well, how the word's going to get out, I'm not sure. There's people that say they're friends of Eritrea that come to festivals and, and praise Eritrea at the festivals, all expenses paid trips, by the way. And then, where are they now? Occasionally there's something positive in Black Agenda report, but nothing really substantial and nothing really ongoing. And, so, it's like where things are going. It's an uphill battle. But it's interesting, they're talking about, TikTok is being shut down, and TikTok has become a big voice of the young people, the alternative to what the genocide that Israel's carrying out in Gaza. So, there's an interview with Tony Blinken, this big war criminal, who's saying, we got to shut down TikTok because, this is the one where people are getting the word out. Well, TikTok's been a voice, and that was something that, this revolutionary movement in Africa could take advantage of. But they're shutting it down, but they're talking about maybe Elon Musk going to buy TikTok. So who knows where that's going to go. But, if Musk buys TikTok and he allows it to have some voice like Twitter does, then he may clamp down on the anti-Israel stuff, but, it's got a voice for Africa, and TikTok got a potential to really get the word out about Africa. especially about Eritrea. So who knows? There's still some hope.
Right. Well, thank you. And if I could talk a little bit about some of the other things, we have listeners, viewers. We may take some questions because we're going to try to translate a lot of the things that we discussed to Tigrinya as well, because our listeners in the solo media circles are mainly Tigrinya speakers, even though we spoke in English. So, with that said, we'd like to take some questions. As we take questions, though, I'd like to ask you, what is your plan in terms of going forward in the future, and what do you have any plans to go back to Eritrea?
Well, my wife and I both have medical problems, and we need the sort of medicines that is sometimes impossible to get in Eritrea. So that's the reason why we had to leave in 2021, because COVID came and the shipping was shut down, and my wife was running out of her heart meds, and since then I've had to get in medicines that I need. So our problem is that until Eritrea is still suffering under unofficial and official sanctions, it makes it hard to get medicine there. So it's tough for us to live in Eritrea. So we're sort of stuck here in the U.S. for a while. So we're sort of out of the picture in terms of being inside Eritrea. But there's a lot of young people in Eritrea that are becoming more conscious. The government may improve internet access, in which case, people in Eritrea will be more and more be able to watch programs like this. And but until then, it's like the only social media in Eritrea is WhatsApp, right? So you can't even really do email there. So, WhatsApp.
Do you have any plans to maybe document a little bit of the experiences you've had over the years with Eritrea? Do you have any plans or any agendas?
Well, basically, I try to speak about current events. What's happened in the past is the past. It's good to educate people about that. I try to do, I try to talk about that when I do speak. But things are moving pretty fast in Africa right now, and in the Horn of Africa, things are developing. I mean, who would have thought that the Houthis would have shut down access to the Red Sea to the Israelis, who would be in a tit for tat war with the United States, in the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. So I mean, things are just like, whoa! All of a sudden, this militia in Yemen, the poorest of all the African countries, all the Arab countries, was going to stand up to the United States and basically, threaten Israel with economic blockade. So I mean, that's like a big development, right? I mean, even it's like, whoa! And then you've got the disaster in Sudan, but that looks like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and some major changes in Ethiopia coming up. These are all really big deals that Eritrea is going to have to play a leading role in all of this. So just keeping up with what's going on in the Horn of Africa is like, I don't speak Amhara or Tigrinya, really. I mean, I can follow a little bit, but not really. My wife is sort of my intelligence gathering and filters it all and tells me what's going on, so I can, distribute what I know. But so
what do you think of the role? We didn't touch a little bit about Iran, the Middle East in general, the greater Middle East, like with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, all that, with the Houthis, the Yemen, all that. What do you make of all that part of the world in relations to Eritrea? And I'll try to summarize everything quickly so that we don't take longer, and that we didn't touch that earlier on. So can you tell us a little bit about that, about the regions of the Middle East?
Well, the Arab countries, I mean, Eritrea did not join the Arab League because, for good reason. I mean, the Arab countries themselves have got major internal contradictions that are not anywhere close to being solved. I mean, the Saudis are the big powerhouse in the Horn of Africa, but Egypt is starting to step up. But Egypt itself is facing an economic crisis. I mean, people are going hungry, and it's getting worse in Egypt. Power cuts and water shortages and food shortages. Egypt remains, basically under the control of the IMF, and the United States continues to fund the Egyptian military. Egypt is looking to BRICS to help them, develop some sort of independence and help them, break the stranglehold the IMF and the U.S. has had on their economy and their country. But, Egypt itself you could see another revolution in Egypt. I mean, or at least a breakdown. They could see al-Sisi lose control. So
Right.
just look. The situation there is looking like what brought Mubarak down. So Egypt right now is playing a positive role in Sudan and a positive role with Somalia, and I hope they continue to do so. But Egypt is not a particularly stable country. Now, Saudi Arabia is much more stable, and Saudi Arabia is a very powerful force in the Horn of Africa. And, they've basically been playing a positive role there, but as far as the Arabs go, it's it's kind of depressing. I mean, just how the people in Gaza are just being slaughtered and starved to death, and nobody's doing anything. The only thing that's happening is every few days, and maybe a missile from Yemen lands in Tel Aviv. Other than that, the Palestinians it's just this huge crime, and nobody is doing anything about it. So, I mean, Russia's not in a position to do anything about it because they got their hands full in Ukraine. They got to finish off this Nazi government in Ukraine and stabilize that. And China's not in a position to intervene militarily anywhere. So, what's going to happen with the Arab world? That's a big question. I mean, if Egypt blows up, you're going to see a lot of fireworks in the Middle East. So, I don't know really what's going to happen to Arabs, and it's sort of depressing, really. I mean, but Eritrea is working hard with the Arab people, and they're, I think they're the Arab leadership sort of realizes that Eritrea is playing a very positive role. And so hopefully that will continue. And in the meantime, it's like, man, I can't even watch Al Jazeera because there's like what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians. It's like, I mean, I've been supporting the Palestinians since 1982. And I've seen a lot of big crimes committed against the Palestinians, but nothing like this.
Right.
And this is
right.
And the whole
world, most of the world is equally disgusted by what's been going on. So the problem, like you said, is, how do you solve that issue? And I hope that, the new administration in the U.S. will come in and at least, make some changes for the people.
Well, it looks like Trump is, I mean, the fact that Netanyahu was not invited to Trump's inauguration and that the Israeli leadership is angry at Trump right now. So, if we'd have known this was going to happen, we wouldn't have supported him. What? Right. So, I mean, okay, so, Trump may be who knows what he's going to do, but he may cease, he's got Tulsi Gabbard right there trying to give him some good information, advice. If he takes her advice, he may be able to do something positive. I mean, he's surrounded by a bunch of, radical war hawks and pro-Zionist criminals, but on the other hand, he seems like he's able to at this point make his own decisions, and if he's going to put pressure on Israel, then that's a big deal. So, I mean, we'd had no hope for that. Biden was never going to do any of that. Tony Blinken's a rabid Zionist, so Trump may be about to bring some changes. We don't know. Nobody can predict where Trump's going to head doing, but we can hope. And that's about the best we can do right now.
Well, we're reaching the 1 hour mark, and I think a lot of this is going to be translated. I believe our colleague is General Vinak is going to translate some of this information. And the last question I want to ask you is, where do you see Eritrea in 2025?
Well, this is, like I've written recently, is the transitional year with this. Shabia's fourth Congress, and that this with this major development in mining. I mean, look, we've got to look at mining. You've got a satellite mine off of Bisha in Harena that's pumping out copper, zinc, and gold. You've got the Asmara mine pumping out copper and significant amounts of gold. You've got the potash mine that's should be up and running by the end of the year, pumping out $500 million of potash, which Eritrea should get about 200 million of that a year. So, in 25 is going to be a transitional year for Eritrea from the bad old days in the past into this new direction. And I think that's why the Congress has been called, because Isaias Afwerki recognizes that, he's been out making deals with the Italians. He's been making deals with the South Koreans to develop Eritrea, to bring in Italian industrial expertise, to help Eritrea develop its industrial base for the Koreans that come in. The very quality construction that they did, Koreans built 30 years ago in Dakore and Asmara and Massawa. These Dakore is still a really quality place to live, some of the best housing in Eritrea. So, I mean, if the Koreans come in, they could make, big strides to, alleviate the housing crisis in Eritrea. The one area that I really wonder about, because, mining is going to fund agriculture, mining is going to fund industrial development. The one area that I'm going to be following is marine resources, because, to be honest, what's been going on in the Red Sea has been fashilo. It's been a failure. I mean, Eritrea's got this tremendous potential, not only for fishing, but especially for aquaculture and mariculture. I mean, just lobster export could be run $100 million a year coming in the country. Mariculture, which is shellfish, scallops, and oysters, could run $50-60 million a year for the country. Just fishing, not only for Eritrean consumption, but for export to its neighbors, could be in hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And you could grow fish in Eritrea. You've got ideal conditions to grow fish, to farm fish in Eritrea. Ideal, some of the best, if not the best in the world. So all of this could become, and it's not investment stressful. I mean, Eritrea could do this sort of, sustainable fishing in Eritrea without having to invest a whole lot of money. And so, I'm looking forward to seeing what the plan is for the development of marine resources. But mining is really taking off. And this is going to provide, I figure within about 5 years, even before the Aberna gold mine that Alpha Exploration is exploring, even before that major gold mine comes in, you're talking about maybe as much as 3 million ounces of gold. We're talking about $8 to $9 billion from just one mine. And this is, the next major development in the Arab-Nubian Shield in mining, one of the 3 richest mining regions in the planet. So, Alpha has got exploration licenses from Barentu all the way up to Nakfa. And this Aberna is just the first one they're developing. So, mining is going to make a major contribution to the Eritrean economy, and it should be really kicking in by the end of 2025. So I think we're going to start seeing the next, 5 years maybe, but 10 years. The next 10 years, I think this Congress is going to be mapping out the next 10 years forward. And I think within 5 years, we're going to see major developments in Eritrea to the point where Eritrea will be bringing in, just the Embadurvo mine could be bringing in 150 million a year to the country. And then Potash could be bringing in another, 200 million a year to the country. And then you've got all these other mines. At some point, Eritrea could be making, 500, 600, 700 million a year coming in from mining within the next 5 years. And with the Aberna gold mine being developed, Eritrea could be bringing in, that mine alone could be bringing in over $1 million a day to Eritrea. So, you're heading up towards close to $1 billion a year coming into the country from mining. That means Eritrea is going to see a big surge in development, something that people have just been sort of like, yeah, right, we're someday, right. No, it's like, I think that's why this Congress is being held, because they're getting ready for a new big step up. And, the old bureaucracy and the old structures, it's not, the people there are really, they're going to have to bring in young blood to be able to handle all this energy and drive that's going to take to really to modernize the economy. So I think this Congress is the first major step, and I'm really looking forward to what comes out of that.
Well, thank you very much, and we appreciate you, and we hope a great year for you, and we hope to see you in Eritrea sometime soon. And if there are any questions, we looked around, so nobody has asked, but I believe Solo and General Vainak are going to translate this, what we've talked about. They're going to try to make it more understandable to the audience. So with that, I want to say thank you, Mr. Thomas Mountain, for being here. If anybody else want to say something, please, General Vainak or Solo, if you want to say something, there you go. That's the video of that Michael Rubin. Yeah. I got to say something to you. He can't even he's so far away that, the shoe that President Isaias steps on,
Afwerki is ending. His end could not come soon enough. He's 77 years old, and even though he may believe he is going to last forever, it's clear that Isaias Afwerki is a has-been who will be quickly forgotten in history. What is Isaias Afwerki's legacy? He's taken what could have been the most prosperous country in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa, and transformed it into a ruin. By any objective measure, be it the World Bank, be it the International Monetary Fund, be it by any number of other independent assessors, Eritrea is a disaster, and it needn't be. That is the tragedy. Today, it's one of the poorest countries on earth. It's one of the most corrupt, and it certainly is one of the most free. That said, I'm very optimistic about the future of Eritrea. And my main reason for optimism is because of Eritreans themselves. I ignore what the regime says and what those under the pay of the regime say. The fact of the matter is, wherever Eritreans have fled, they have become vital members of civil society and of the economy. And there's no reason why they might not take their energy, their activity, and their ability and reinvest it in Eritrea to allow Eritrea to achieve what, frankly, it should have achieved decades ago. You know, Isaias may believe that his family is going to take over. Much like in North Korea, the Kim family has managed to keep control. That's a fantasy. Abraham, his son, is not going to be able to consolidate power. He's not going to be able to win the support of the army. Too many people may want to try to gain ultimate power. Once Isaias is gone, once he's buried, he's not going to be able to influence succession. And simply because he may believe that he is God's gift to the world does not mean that the Eritrean people are going to want to continue with anyone in his family, especially because, as I've said, Isaias's legacy will not be positive and he will not be remembered well in history. One of the reasons why Isaias will not be able to consolidate.
It is, Thomas, it is really, really funny. Even though life have three dimensions, which is his view, our view, and the reality in the ground. But in our view, number one, we believe Eritrea to Eritreans by Eritreans. Number two, who is he even to tell what Eritrea needs to be and where Eritrea needs to be? It is amazing, like the arrogance and the stupidity to talk about something you don't know, but with full energy and with full confidence to make it look like it is a real thing. He don't know Eritrea, this guy. I don't think he know anything about Eritrea. So can you comment a little bit about that, please?
Well, this is not the first time I've heard some white guy from the West get up there and rant and rave, say all these, nasty things about Eritrea. I mean, the guy's obviously never been to Eritrean festival, never been around Eritrean people. So, he's just saying what the people that pay him want him to say. So, to take this guy seriously, who is he? He doesn't have any influence, anything. He's got nothing to do with the Trump administration. So I don't think anybody's really listening to him. I don't think the Eritrean people should worry because, I mean, I remember back in 2009, the crisis group were saying, oh, Eritrea is going to be a failed state. I mean, it's like, you know, I mean, I've heard so much of these so-called experts ranting and raving about Eritrea, and it was just prunes. I mean, you know, I mean, the School of Oriental Africa Studies, what's their name? The think tank they got there, they were saying, oh, it's not a question of if, but when Eritrea is going to fall. I mean, there's been saying this for a long time. So I don't take him seriously. I mean, if you hadn't showed this to me now, I wouldn't even have watched it because these guys they're liars for hire. They're paid agents from the Western Empire, and they're just trying to, you know, stir up trouble. Don't pay any attention to them. Eritrea is headed for the future is right opening up this year in front of Eritrea. Eritrea is about to become, you know, a major economic player in the Horn of Africa.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Solo.
For his family is because Eritrea, despite the frequent comparisons, is not North Korea. North Korea was able, while there's a North Korean diaspora in China, for example, perhaps in Russia, some defectors in South Korea, the North Korean diaspora has not been able to thrive in locations with freedom. China has a concerted interest in keeping North Korea the way it is. Eritreans, however, are in the United States. They're in Europe. They're across the Horn of Africa. They're in the Middle East. And there's no way that the Eritrean diaspora is going to be silenced the way the North Korean diaspora is. That is perhaps the key point as we look forward. Location is huge in this case. It means that it will be impossible to isolate Eritrea, and it will be impossible to prevent Eritrea from achieving what it is meant to achieve. There simply are too many people in the diaspora at this point. Imagine, right now, President Isaias illegally seeks to impose and imposes a 2% tax effectively on ethnicity. This isn't like the American bad policy, admittedly.
What is really, really funny, I mean, you know, like without going to a personal thing, it is not only Eritrea that charge 2%. I mean, as American citizen, if you go establish a business somewhere else, like anywhere, you are mandated to pay 2%. I mean, not mandated, but, you know, like voluntary, you have to pay 2%.
30%. You pay 21%, 22.5% capital gains tax on any capital gains you make outside. I mean, one year when I was, you know, I paid $30,000 to the United States government, and I wasn't even living in the United States when I made that money. So I mean, it's like this guy is like, you know, he's just spouting what he thinks his bosses want him to say, and it's like ridiculous. You go to Eritrean festivals to see completely different reality. But you know, hey, these guys there's nothing new. Once he's dead and gone, there'll be another guy jump out and say the same thing about Eritrea. That's why I don't take them serious.
No, but
if I could add, Metzger, if I could add.
Go ahead.
So he works for a think tank. As you know, there's plenty of think tanks in this capital city here in Washington, in our area. And he's for the American Enterprise Institute. And their purpose is to defend, quote unquote, to defend the principles and improve the institutions of American freedom and democratic capitalism, limited government, private enterprise, individual liberty and responsibility, vigilant and effective defensive and foreign policies, political accountability, and open debate. He never debates anything. He just comes up with his own conclusions. This guy has done it several times. I mean, the bottom line is he's just another person who's probably being paid money to utter the things that he's doing right now, because that's how they survive. That's how a lot of those think tanks survive. They get support even from foreign countries. They're allowed to get funding from foreign countries, foreign organizations, those who support the TPLF, or maybe even the Abiy government, or whoever doesn't like Eritrea. They're allowed to get money from them.
The National Endowment for Democracy, which is funded by the CIA. I mean,
Absolutely.
it's like they're basically getting their money one way or another from the national security establishment in the United States.
Absolutely. And that it's a known fact. Our people in diaspora, most everybody is aware of those things. And the 2% is not something that's forced on people. You pay based on your abilities, and you're still allowed to go to Eritrea and do the things you want to do. But there are certain things you're going to be limited, because obviously, in order for you to accomplish certain things within Eritrea, in the land of Eritrea, you got to pay, and you got to pay the entire amount of your debt to the country, because people sacrifice their lives, whether they like it or not. This 2% issue has become a topic of discussion. People are going to pay 2%, whether you like it or not, because they feel responsible and attached to the people who sacrifice their lives for the nation. But you're not forced to do it. Some of us don't even have paid. We haven't even paid. I'm gonna be honest. Some of us haven't paid the entire 2% amount that we're supposed to pay. If you can't afford it, you're not limited to that. It's not part of life. It's not part of a make or break. So I want to stress that to the public, that everybody knows it. But go ahead. And በትግርኛ ክንዛረብ ኣለና ይብልና ኣለዉ። So ከመይ ጌርና ትራንስሌት ከም ንገብሮ ክንዛረበሉ ኣለና ማለት እዩ።
ከም ሕቶ ነቕርቦሞኒ እንድሕር ኩልኹም ብትግርኛ ትርድኡ ኣለኹም ኮንኩም ርዳእና እዩ ርትዓውያን ክንከውን ስለ ዘለና እንድሕር ትግርኛ ትርድኡ ኣለኹም ኮንኩም አሚን እንግሊሽ እንድሕር ብደንብ ትርድእዎ ኣለኹም ኮንኩም ብደለዎ ክንቅፅል ምክንያቱ ንዕጠጠው እናበልና ክስታይ ክንገብር ቁሩብ ክብል እዩ አይ ደሓን ግድን ክትርጎም ኣለዎ ትብሉ እንድሕር ኣለኹም ከኣኒ 00 ግበሩ እንድሕር ክትርጎም የብሉ እንድሓን ብእንግሊሽ ቀፅሉ እንድሕር ኢልኩም ግን ሓደ ሓደ ግበሩ ሞኒ ሽዑ ምስቲ ሕቶታት ደለናን ካብ ተኸታተልቲ ከኣኒ ሕቶታት እናተቐበልና ክንቅፅል ምእንቲ thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
No, they didn't finish.
Oh, you're not finished. Okay.
Of our own expatriate taxation. Because when people are no longer a citizen of Eritrea, this tax is still imposed. And if they do not pay this tax, their family pays the price. It's organized crime. It's not simply taxation. However, one of Eritrea's greatest, its greatest resources is, of course, its diaspora, is, of course, the remittances which its diaspora pay. Now, if the Eritreans had the ability to invest in their own country, invest in their own families, not as a means of paying off a mafia boss, but rather as a means to rebuild their country in a way that will grow its wealth, then there's no reason why they should limit their investments to 2%. The fact of the matter is, with a transparent economy, with a free market, acidic history upon the country, because Azayas is 77 years old, because he has suffered strokes, because he's not going to live forever, it's crucial that all the diaspora...
It is really, really funny, but Thomas, since you laugh about it, can you comment on that and whatever you want to comment about what he said so far? Thanks.
Well, Isaias is a very healthy guy. I mean, he's still very vibrant and full of drive and energy. And I don't know, this guy's just making stuff up. Isaias has had strokes. What evidence does he have that? It's the opposite. So, I mean, it's sort of like, this is sort of like a joke, this whole interview here. I mean, mafia. I mean, this Doug Valentine written a book called CIA is Organized Crime, about how the American government is basically a great big mafia extorting the rest of the world. It's U.S. Western hegemony that's oppressing everybody. It's not Eritrea. It's not Isaias Afwerki. So, it's these guys are, like I say, they're liars for hire. And I guess for comic relief, I might watch them, but They say Isaias has had strokes. Please. I mean, we had an American president riddled with dementia. You know, you could tell the guy is not all there. And this guy's going to talk about Isaias? So, I mean, it's okay. These guys are like jokers.
It's amazing, Thomas. But to get back to our topic, I have a couple of questions for you. The Horn of Africa holds significant strategic importance due to its proximity to key shipping route and global trade. How have global powers like US, China, and the European Union engaged with the region in recent years? And what is the impact has this had on local geopolitics?
Well, you know, the fact that the Houthis have shut down Israeli trade and mostly American commerce through the Horn of Africa, I mean, through the Red Sea, I think it's a big deal. I mean, I predicted for many years that when the U.S. lost control of Bab al-Mandeb, the Gate of Tears between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, marked the beginning of the end of U.S. empire. Well, you know, even more so, the U.S. defeat in Ukraine is marking the end of the U.S. hegemony and basically the collapse of the European Union. So, I mean, you know, the Horn of Africa is a critical strategic choke point. You know, but the reality is the Houthis blocking this trade through the Suez Canal. It's cost the Egyptian government some $7 or $8 billion, which they can ill afford to lose because they're already a crisis-ridden economy. So strapped for foreign currency and having to pay off these predatory loans from the IMF and the World Bank. So, you know, the Horn of Africa, I think the Houthi blockade of Israel and the Western countries through the Horn, I think, has been very telling. And, you know, it sort of exposed the weakness of the hegemony, Western hegemony, for the rest of the world to see. A small little militia like the Houthis to be able to make such an impact. But then, you know, it's, you know, I think the Straits of Hormuz is even more critical than Bab al-Mandeb. The Straits, I mean, one of the reasons why China has been pressuring Iran not to go to war with Israel is because if that happens and the Straits of Hormuz shut down, the China's going to lose such a big chunk of their oil and their energy. It's going to make a big problem for China. So China's been, you know, telling Iran just chill. I mean, why hasn't Iran responded to all these attacks Israel's done to them? So, you know, even why the U.S. I mean, they killed one of their top military leaders and they really didn't do anything. So, you know, I mean, why? You know, I think right now we're sort of in a holding pattern in the Middle East or the West Asia, more accurately, and that you know what's going to happen with Israel now, I think, is kind of key. But again, you know, Egypt is a big problem for the Western countries, and what's going to happen in the Red Sea, we'll see.
Thanks, Thomas. The second question I would like to ask you is countries like UAE, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia have increasingly involved themselves in the Horn of Africa. What are their specific interests in the region, and how do they shape the balance of power?
Well, Turkey, you know, Erdogan wants to be the next Ottoman. So, you know, he's trying to extend his influence into the Horn of Africa. You know, he looks at it sort of like his natural backyard. I mean, you know, sort of what he's doing in Syria. So, you know, but Turkey itself, the economy is not in very good shape. And Erdogan's just kind of balancing on the verge of a disaster. I mean, the next election, unless he cheats really blatantly, I mean, I don't see how he's going to win it. He's going to have to stay in power. He's going to go to prison. So Turkey is in a position now where they're scrambling to keep afloat. They're economically keep afloat. So, you know, Saudi Arabia, though, that's a good question. They're a major player. They're very strong. They've supposedly made some peace inroads with Iran. You know, it used to be they're very hostile, and now they're, you know, exchanging ambassadors again, and they're working together. So I think Saudi Arabia has realized that Western hegemony is sort of seen its highlights, and Saudi Arabia's got to start being more independent, and so they're starting to work with Russia. They're starting to work with China. They're not just the flunky for the United States anymore, for the Western hegemonists anymore. So Saudi Arabia is becoming more independent, and but they're a major player in the Horn of Africa and West Asia. So you can't ignore them in terms of the Red Sea. They're the major player, almost as much as Egypt. So other than that, the Russia is trying to. Russia looks like Russia is going to be coming into a base in the Red Sea in Sudan, a naval base. So we've got some external factors coming in that's a major threat to the Western hegemony. So times are changing, and I think Eritrea is sort of watching all this and developing. They're continuing to develop independently. So I thought that I would see more political support from China and Russia than after last year's big summits. But Eritrea's working ahead. I don't think Isaias wants to see anybody really be that important in Eritrea. He wants to maintain his independence.
Thank you, Thomas. Another question I have is, with the ongoing tension between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, even though it seems like it's normalizing between Somalia and Ethiopia, as well as the change alliance in the region, what are the key factors driving this complex relationship? Are there any opportunity for sustainable peace and cooperation among these countries?
Well, there is a great deal of potential. But see, right now, Abiy Ahmed's on his last legs. So he's doing a lot of desperate things to try to keep himself in power however he can. So, until he's gone, until there's a stable force in power in Ethiopia that can keep the country from falling apart and start to deal with these huge problems that got the millions of displaced people, the millions of people starving, all this damage that's been done by the TPLF and then by Abiy, waging war against his own people, that, until that's solved, until the situation in Sudan is resolved with, basically the expelling the UAE out of Sudan and the end of this Hemeti rebellion, then, it's going to be unstable. But, both of those things, it's not going to keep going like this forever. I think Hemeti's days are numbered as well. So Sudan is about to come to the light at the end of the tunnel is now visible. And Ethiopia, Abiy is going to be gone. It's got to be gone this year. I don't see him surviving the end of 2025, especially the way his military is crumbling and final victories. And, the Somali government right now has been, that's the president of Somalia has been sort of playing all sides of the table and trying to, keep the pressure off however he can. But, making a deal with Ethiopia is going to really undermine his popularity among the Somali people. So I don't see even him lasting that long. So I think until there's, some stable leadership in these three countries, it's going to be sort of fingernail biting situation going on. So, but eventually all this is going to stabilize. It's not going to go on forever. There's light at the end of the tunnel and all this. And I think the role Eritrea is playing is going to be, historically, it's going to come out that Eritrea has really been playing a very important role behind the scenes. Now, whether everybody else recognizes that, that's a different story. But I think that's what's really going on.
Thank you, Thomas. And I have another one. Since you mentioned about Abiy Ahmed, he won last this year, given the Ethiopian internal conflict and the ongoing challenges in the Tigray region, Oromo region, and Amhara region, what implication does this have for the broader Horn of Africa? Can Ethiopia instability create a ripple effect across the neighboring countries?
Well, Ethiopia is in the midst of a civil war. literally a civil war being raged between the Ethiopian government and the Amhara Fano army. So until this is resolved with basically the military defeat of Abiy Ahmed's gangster regime, then until then, Ethiopia is not going to be able to really deal with its problems because, you can't, Fano's got to have national power, or at least significant power within the country to be able to deal with millions of people starving, millions of people displaced, and all these internal problems Ethiopia has. So, let alone the external influence that's being, using to destabilize the country. So, there's a civil war going on. I mean, that's just reality. And so, until that civil war is resolved, until Abiy Ahmed gets on probably a United States American military plane and leaves the country, and for wherever he heads, maybe his ill-gotten gains in Dubai or wherever, he's the situation is not going to stabilize in Ethiopia. There's a war going on. The war's got to come to a conclusion, and it can't be just like a ceasefire. There's got to be a definite victory. Abiy Ahmed's regime's got to be defeated, destroyed, and the leadership, this corrupt, brutal leadership, driven out of the country. Whether Fano's going to be able to hold the country together or not, that's another story. But that's the hope, right? So and that's why I know Eritrea has been working with Fano, and I've known that from firsthand reports going back a few years. It's not something that people really talk about much anymore, but it's just, it makes sense, and I know from past firsthand reports that that's been happening. So Eritrea is going to be there, a big brother looking over Fano's shoulder and saying, "Look, why don't you try this? Watch out for that. Here, can we help you with this?" So, it's sort of like what Eritrea started doing with General Burhan in Sudan, intervening directly if they have to. So, I think this is what the one positive thing about all of this is that, Eritrea has got a role model to play and a leadership role to play, and they are doing this. It's just not something that's talked about publicly.
Thank you, Thomas. Another question: what are the primary drivers of conflict in the Horn of Africa, particularly in countries like Ethiopia, Somalia, and Sudan? And how can this issue be addressed sustainably?
Well, the primary drivers of conflict are the external forces. The UAE has been the primary driver of conflict in Sudan. And of course, the UAE is trying to regain a foothold in Somalia. And they're supporting the Abiy Ahmed regime in Ethiopia. And the Western hegemony has also been trying to destabilize Somalia. The U.S. military is still in Somalia, bombing Somalia. And in the U.S., like I say, they'd rather see Ethiopia fall apart than Ethiopia united under a strong nationalist independent government. So external forces is the main drivers of instability now, as it always has been. So I think that's the problem that is until this is resolved, it's going to have to be resolved militarily, at least in the case of Sudan and Ethiopia. Then these foreign forces are going to continue causing problems.
Thank you, Thomas. Before I proceed to my next question, there is a couple of people, so I'm going to give opportunity so I don't hold the stage just for myself. So I cannot see because I'm using my phone, but can one of you open your mic and then ask a question if you have a question?
I can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Mountain. Long-time admirer, much appreciated for the work you do. My question are three-phased. Considering the Red Sea and the Red Sea Forum that has been being played by, number one, European Union, the Gulf states, and also, the big brother, the United States, over the last, let's say, 30 years, specifically after independence. And of course, before independence, we know the whole story with Kagnew Station and Haile Selassie and Eisenhower, or I think at that time, the president of the United States, that they met in Cairo, where Eritrea was, pretty much slaughtered and given to Ethiopia in a silver platter. Now, the game that is being played and has been played mainly was for the American interest, considering the European Union being the satellites. And of course, when I say the United States, the beloved daughter of the United States, the Israeli state, during Haile Selassie, the Israelis trained the Eritrean commandos. And even to the last day of the 1990, when Mengistu was defeated and the Soviet Union was pretty much, picking up their remnants and going back to Russia, it was the Israelis that supported Mengistu, even at his last dying days, where they gave him millions of dollars so that they can take the falashas. And everybody knows the thing that upset, we call it in Tigrinya, upset, that took place in Massawa, where the Israelis provided Mengistu with the bombs. I remember at that time, their ambassador to Canada flatly denied that they were only helping Ethiopia Mengistu through agriculture, but they provided the ammunition that was bought from Brazil, but it was Israel that did that. And even though after independence, they tried to be friendly, just on top, they always supported Ethiopia. Case in point, the 98-2000 war, the Israelis were the ones that supported Meles, for example, destroying the Eritrean radar, any of the thing that deals with radar jamming and stuff like that, fixing the old MiG planes. I think they I don't know, from 20 to 40 planes were re-equipped and rebuilt, and they provided, and they're still doing that. So, excuse me, to come to the current war.
Oh, I think he lost contact while he is getting reconnected. How is the conflict in Sudan impacting the broader Horn of Africa region, especially in terms of refugee flow and economic disruption?
Well, it's been a big disaster. I mean, it's been a major impact on the Eritrean economy. Eritrea had strong economic ties to Sudan, so this really hurt. I mean, Eritrea's had both of its neighbors basically cut off from economic intercourse with Eritrea. So, I mean, a lot of the economy in Eritrea has not been able to develop because they've lost, contact, intercourse with their neighbors, the two biggest neighbors, Ethiopia and Sudan. So, but I think one of the points that I need to make is that Western hegemony is facing a major defeat. It's basically been defeated in Ukraine. I mean, they thought, the Americans thought, the Europeans thought that Russia was going to collapse, and it didn't. Not only did it collapse, Russia's gotten stronger, and instead the European Union, the European economies are crumbling. And so I mean, I think there's some big hits that are happening to Western hegemony that's limiting the ability of Western hegemony to continue to interfere in the world, especially in Africa. So I think that's a very positive sign that interference probably is going to be less and less, and especially as the Western economies, and their governments have to face up to the fact that they've lost in Ukraine, and that what are they going to do? The rest of the world is going to say, hey, we don't have to be afraid of the United States anymore. We don't have to worry about, we've got BRICS now. We can, there's alternatives to the West. So I think these are all areas that are going to, play a major role in developments in Africa, in the Horn of Africa. So as far as Sudan is concerned, this war was a disaster. It was external interference that provoked it and gave Hemeti the idea that somehow he could win. And, he was, in the beginning, he did a lot of big advances, but he's losing now. And I don't think he's going to, I don't think it's going to go on forever. So, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And once Sudan gets stabilized and they're able to, get back on their feet economically and start taking care of their people, then the links will, with peace, they'll trade with Eritrea will start to grow and Eritrean economy will help with that as well. So, Sudan's potentially a rich country. I mean, they've got a lot of mineral wealth and at one time Sudan was the breadbasket. I mean, before Bashir came in and looted his gangster regime looted everything, Sudan used to export wheat. Used to be one of the breadbaskets of the area. Now Sudan's like a beggar nation. So, Sudan gets back on its feet. That's good for everybody. And so the next step is, Ethiopia getting peace established in Ethiopia and self-sufficiency in Ethiopia. So, I think but we have to realize that Western hegemony is crumbling. I mean, it's no longer the superpower. They've been defeated significantly. It's a major defeat they've suffered in Ukraine. And this is going to reflect on all their ability internationally. Now, whether they're going to go to war with Russia, with China, like they're talking about, that China is the major threat and all that, that's another big deal, right? But in the meantime, it's limiting their ability to interfere.
No, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. All the plan that they plan to control the world is crumbling before their eye. I mean, Europe, you cannot imagine what it looks like right now. And a lot of, I wrote a couple of articles, like, for example, Taiwan, Malaysia, Indonesia, they already participating or seeking a membership with BRICS. Even Philippines, recently they opened about 4 bases, military bases, but now they are distancing themselves because they know it's not gonna, like nobody aboard in a sinking ship. The whole dynamic is changing, and from unipolar to multipolar world that we're getting in. But to go back to the next question, how is the growing competition between global powers like US, China, Russia, and the Gulf states shaping the geopolitical dynamic of the Horn of Africa?
Well, the fact that you have Western hegemony on decline, and you have BRICS led by Russia and China and the other countries on rising, this is like a major change, right? You've got people like Egypt and others joining BRICS, and so there's an alternative to Western control. There's an alternative to the predatory loans of the IMF and the World Bank. So these are areas that show a lot of promise and development. And I think that's why Saudi Arabia, even though they're not officially joining BRICS yet, they're playing ball with BRICS. They're cooperating with BRICS because they see where the handwriting on the wall. And once the rest of the world starts to realize that this once superpower United States, which seemed to be invincible, could punish anybody that stood up to them and crush anybody that stood up to them, is no longer able to do that. And I think there's going to be a lot of countries starting to say, a lot of leadership saying, well, okay, let's benefit from this. Let's start to develop our economy. Let's start to help our own people. Let's start to be really independent, and let's start to cooperate with and work with our neighbors to, do what's best for all of us in the region. So I think this is where we're headed, and I think the defeat of Western hegemony in Ukraine is sort of opening the eyes of the people in the Horn of Africa.
Thank you, Thomas. The following question, of course, I'm reading from questions that I'm receiving from people. To what extent does the region dependency on foreign aid hinder long-term economic development to the Horn of Africa countries?
Well, it's not so much foreign aid as it's these predatory loans that the IMF and the World Bank use to control the economies, especially in Africa. I mean, the IMF and the World Bank still, dominate a lot in South America and even in Asia, but the one area that they really maintain hegemony is in Africa. So that's part of neocolonialism, is this installing this predatory loan culture where they loan you money that they know you can't pay back, these odious loans. And then once you can't pay back, then they can come in and control your economy, tell you what you have to do. So, once that cycle of predatory loans is broken, then countries can start developing independently. Now, of course, it's going to take leadership. I mean, for example, Ruto in Kenya, he's not going to break with the IMF because they've got him. They control his economy. I mean, so, but you've seen people like in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger starting to break with the IMF and the World Bank, saying, no, we're not going to let you control us anymore. We're not going to let the French dominate us anymore. So, there's major steps being taken away from Western control. And, the West controls through their financial institutions, through the predatory loans, and then, forcing you to relinquish control of your economy to pay the loans back. So, you've got major changes coming, and the changes are, I don't know how fast it's going to come. I always tend to think it's going to come faster than it does, but it's coming, and there's no stopping it.
Thank you, Thomas. One of our brother who got disconnected earlier is back, so I'm going to give him the opportunity. So I don't want to be greedy. I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to be greedy.
Thank you, Mutkel. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Your stream for some reason disconnected me. I'll be brief. What's your take on what Turkey is doing all the way from Libya, and what's it's playing in Somalia, considering the tripartite meeting that Egypt, Eritrea, and Somalia have been having, and what the Somali prime minister or president is doing? One day he's in Asmara, the next day he's in Egypt, and then the next day he's in Ethiopia. How much of a game is Turkey playing with Qatar and the Emirati? I know Emirati is supporting Ethiopia. At the same time, Turkey is also selling drones to Ethiopia. So these three countries have been wreaking havoc in Africa and also in the Middle East and in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. And do you also think all these countries are playing under the blessing of the United States? The second question is what Azerbaijan is doing, and if there is any covert game being played of what it did. There are three ships. They said the wind kind of blew them towards the Eritrean territory, but come on. I have not seen any of a storm that has done pushing ships or being sunk by a storm or anything like that, but that's their flimsy reason. Let's see what your take is on this, and if I have any other question I can ask later, but please have your comments on this, and thank you.
Well, Turkey, I think Egypt's not too happy. They're not happy about Turkey playing a role in the region. And there's been some statements about non-littoral people aren't part of the Horn of Africa, aren't going to play a role in the Horn of Africa. So I think Egypt's not, they've stepped up their game when it comes to Somalia. And I think Turkey's role in Somalia is going to be limited, because by Egypt and other people's involvement. So, Turkey is, I think they're, like I say, Erdogan's, he's got an economic crisis in his own hands, and he's just sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and juggling a lot of balls up in the air and trying to keep his own country from collapsing economically. So So I don't see Turkey playing a major role in the Horn of Africa. Now the UAE's got a lot of money, and they're a small country, so they've got money to throw around, and they've been doing that. So that's what their intervention's all about. They can, fund drones and other things like that, which have a significant impact militarily. So they've been doing that. So I think they can prop up, pay salaries for armies and things like that. So, they've been playing that role, especially in Sudan and to a certain extent Ethiopia. But even that, I don't think that's going to last much longer, because I think, like I say, in Sudan, their UAE is about to be shut down, and I think even Ethiopia obviously is going to be driven out, and I think UAE's influence is going to end there. As far as Somali goes, I don't know how much longer this Somali president's going to last. I think Farmajo is probably going to come back into power, and he's going to. That's just it's a guess on my part, but I think that's what's going to most likely going to happen. I don't think, and he's going to shut down a lot of these foreign interventions in his country. So, and the Western hegemony doesn't have the ability to just come in and do whatever they want. Now they're still a danger, and they still can do things. They're still dangerous, but I don't see them having quite the ability they've had in the past, and increasingly less ability to intervene.
Thank you, Thomas. Another question. Like when you predict, especially when you analyze politics, you have to analyze seen and unseen things. The Horn of Africa is highly vulnerable to climate change, with recurrent droughts, food insecurity. How is climate change influence political stability, migration, and regional security?
Well, I think these historic droughts that hit Eritrea back in the first one, 2003, 2004, was a big eye opener for Isaias Afwerki, and he shifted his focus towards food security as focus of national security. So, this big water conservation program is basically food in the bank. And so all these big and not so, medium and small micro dams and large water banks, huge water reservoirs, is all a major push towards Eritrea's, seeing the future of this climate disaster that's hammering the world. LA is burning. Eritrea's, the Horn of Africa, especially the Sahel, has been at the front lines of climate disaster going back until the 70s. The 83 drought, not just in Ethiopia, but in the famine, but it was also in Eritrea, was the early canary in the coal mine about this climate disaster that was developing, mainly caused by Western industrial development damaging the environment. So, Eritrea is a role model in this. Eritrea is developing a food self-sufficiency where, they can feed all their own people and establish food security. And this is why I've criticized Sputnik Africa. How come you guys aren't covering this? This is what Africa has to be doing, not just Africa, but everybody in the world. Everywhere in the world, these countries need to be developing water conservation. Look in Europe, look at Spain. Look at these countries that they're just drying up, and the reservoirs are drying up. How come they're not just building these massive reservoirs everywhere and doing reforestation and doing all and soil conservation and all these other things that are necessary to maintain food security in their countries? So, even in Europe, supposedly rich countries, you just see this climate disaster hammering their economies. Eritrea is not getting hammered by the climate disaster, even though Eritrea is a, undeveloped agriculture-based economy. People aren't starving in Eritrea, even though with sanctions and everything else, Eritrea is, being able to continue to grow their economy because they're developing food self-sufficiency. And that's something everybody in Africa's got to do. And other people need to study the role models. The head of the African Development Bank came to Eritrea and he said, hey, look at these. You guys build all these huge reservoirs all by yourself. Nobody funded this but yourself. This complete self-sufficiency in this. He's totally impressed. How come this isn't something that the Sputnik Africa is covering? You know what I'm saying? These are the sort of questions and statements that the rest of Africa needs to hear about. Of course, the World Bank and the IMF does not want anybody emulating Eritrea. They don't want the rest of Africa to become self-sufficient. They want to be able to control them. So they can control their economy, they can control their food production, then they can control the country. So climate disaster is just a reality, and it's accelerating. And I don't see, I think are going to starve to death. And I think reality, but I don't think people in Eritrea are. I think the Eritrean government's going to be able to feed its people. It's going to become an island of food in the Horn of Hunger, like it's been. But I think that role model and model of self-sufficiency and food security is really got to spread throughout Africa, or it's just going to be chaos and just incredible suffering of African people.
Well, thank you. I absolutely agree with you. Against all odds, that's what it is. But always when you depend on your own capacity, you always overcome things. And that is what Eritrean motto is. And that is what need to be duplicated to most of African countries, regardless what the challenges are. But the Horn of Africa holds considerable economic potential, particularly in sectors like agriculture, energy, and infrastructure. What are the main barriers to fully tapping into this potential, and what steps could be taken to improve economic cooperation in the region?
Well, don't forget marine resources. I mean, that's something that people is just, have just, it's sort of dropped out of the picture. But marine resources, the potential, especially on the Eritrean coastline, tremendous potential for food security for the region. I mean, Eritrea could be exporting thousands of tons of fish and marine products every year. So, the problem is that it's you don't have stable governments, you don't have stable economies, and as a result, you can't develop all these resources that are potential, and the potential is there. I mean, Ethiopia's got a lot of water. Ethiopia, they didn't need this great big Renaissance dam. They could build a lot of the smaller dams and make the electricity they need without, causing a problem with Egypt, and they could use all these dams to irrigate and grow food for all their people. Ethiopia is supposed to be exporting food. They're supposed to be agriculturally rich, but it's a leadership question. So, the leadership's dominated by foreign powers, and so what you've got millions of people starving in Ethiopia, millions of people displaced, and malnutrition rampant, and so. That's a problem. So, I mean, look at Sudan. Sudan used to be a big, major agricultural producer. And then the last decade or so, they've become beggars. They have to survive on imported wheat when they used to producing wheat and exporting wheat. So there's a great potential in the Horn of Africa, especially agricultural potential, and they can use the mineral resources because Sudan, Eritrea, and Ethiopia all include the African Nubian Shield. So they can develop their mineral resources there. And of course, like I say, marine resources, that's a great area. I mean, because there's a link between intelligence in children and omega-3 fatty acids from seafood. Kids that eat X amount, half a kilo a week of fish with high in omega-3 fatty acids do much better in school, have higher what they call IQs, which is kind of a bogus Western concept, but it's a brain food, right? So, we could feed our kids in Eritrea, put all the kids in a fish lunch program twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays or Mondays and Thursdays, and feed them all, free lunch, fish lunch, make fish like you see at Expo in Eritrea, frozen fish patties, and feed the kids fish twice a week, and and develop intelligent children for the future. So, and this could all be done within Eritrea from just from the Red Sea. On top of that, export marine resources outside the country. So, Japan's major export of anything in agriculture or is scallops, shellfish. Eritrea's got scallops. I've eaten scallops in Massawa. The black scallops are really tasty. They're a 3-year crop. You can grow them and harvest them, sustainably without damaging the environment whatsoever. And these, this has got not only potential for Eritreans, but for export. So, oysters are, pearl oysters is a 3-month crop. You can grow pearl oysters in 3 months, and it's a high protein, very with omega-3s, very healthy, and you can use them in Eritrea. I mean, we did a test survey, and we fed Eritreans pearl oysters, and when they asked us, "What is this?" we said, "Oh, this is asa. It's fish." Because we told them oysters, "Oh, no, we don't eat that." But so we said, "Oh, this is asa," and they tasted zigni, and they said, "Whoa, tom." 90% of the people we fed pearl oysters to liked it. But if we told them it was oysters, none of them would have eaten it. So, the Eritreans can eat pearl oysters, a 3-month crop. You can grow pearl oyster in 3 months and feed this. So, I mean, there's a lot of marine potential. There's a lot of agricultural potential, but, you're going to have a major water conservation, soil conservation development. It's got to be the focus. Food security has got to be the focus in the Horn of Africa, just for the people to survive the coming climate disaster.
I absolutely agree with you. But during the occupation of the Ethiopians, we were deprived from our own seas and even utilizing the seafood. So a lot of Eritreans, they're not really familiar with it, but with independence coming, I think we are introduced back to it. So that's a good potential. I absolutely agree with you. What opportunity exists for regional economy integration, and what the main obstacle to achieving it?
Well, Ethiopia's got a civil war raging. Sudan's got a civil war raging. Until the civil wars are resolved, there's no economic integration, because you can't build an economy when the war is raging. So until this is all settled, then it can start building concrete ties, economic ties. So, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons Eritrea is involved in bringing peace to Sudan, through this supporting General Burhan's military. And I think, Eritrea knows that Fano is the only military force that's going to bring peace to Ethiopia. So, and, Fano has been close to Eritrea in the past. So I think Eritrea's doing the right thing in supporting Fano. I mean, right now I don't have hard evidence of that anymore, but that just makes sense, and we know that they've done that in the past. So I think, but until you have a stable political situation, you can't have war and have economic growth. So that's the reality. Until they settle these civil wars in our two biggest neighbors, the two largest countries in the Horn of Africa, including Somalia's got to. I mean, they got to put an end to not Boko Haram, but to Al-Shabaab. And it's clear that Al-Shabaab is not, it's not just existing on their own energy. There's exterior support coming in, paying for Al-Shabaab. That's become clear. So, until that happens, then there's no economic integration, because you can't economically integrate in the midst of wars.
Thank you, Thomas. Mike, do you have any question?
No, I think you hit it all in the nail. Appreciate
Okay.
the great questions. And Thomas, I know it's been 2 hours. It's been a long standing there for you. The last time I had an interview like this was a long time ago.
We still have a little bit to go, because Thomas, I'm going to read you from my article. I'm not going to read the whole article, but a little bit. And this is about the Azerbaijan ship that got seized by Eritrean Navy. A lot of people, like trying to understand. Of course, we're going to explain it in Tigrinya later on. But there is 1982, the UNCLO, which is the Convention of United Nations, the Convention on the Law of Sea, which, like there is peaceful passage and non-peaceful passage. And there is a lot of articles, this ship that trying to cross Eritrean waters on November 7 violate, which is Article 2, Article 17, Article 19, Article 27, Article 38, and Article 70, 73 actually. So I mean, you don't have to state the articles, but can you expand and explain, scenarios, because there is no official statement from Eritrean government, but the Eritrean government also abide by law. So they would not hold the ship as what they're trying to make it look like. It got hit by a wave. So that's why it got to Eritrean territory. But that is not the fact, because that is Red Sea is one of the calmest sea in that effect. So can you a little bit expand on that one, and then we will wrap it up.
Well, in spite of what this Ethiopian gentleman has said about me, I have no connection to the Eritrean government. So I have nothing to do with the Eritrean Ministry of Information. I mean, there's a gentleman named Peter Jesus that, he's part of the Ministry of Information. He's had some interesting statements come out. And so people should address their questions to him, because he's part of the Ministry of Information to find out what's going on, whether he can address these questions or not. So, on my part, it would be speculation. So, I kind of regret sometimes speculating in the past, so I'm being more careful. I've learned a little bit. So, but Eritrea is not going to allow ships carrying arms to pass through their waters, and so I think the ships got seized for a good reason, and there must have been arms on board. Why would Eritrea seize the ships? So I mean, but what's going on, I don't know. This is a question that at this point just speculation, and I don't want to speculate anymore. I was sort of sarcastically, posting up about it, and but it's what we know. It's there's enough reliable reports have come out that seem to verify what some of the things we've said. But it's external powers intervening, and Eritrea is going to protect themselves, and they're going to protect the region the best they can.
No, absolutely, and that is a fair assessment and for a fair answer. I mean, like we are all speculating, and but when you speculate about something, also you have to understand. I mean, the Eritrean government is not going to seize the ships and hold the people on it from November 7. It's almost 3 months right now, unless they violate some international laws and Eritrean laws as well. There is innocent passage, there is suspicious passage, and unauthorized activities. So based on that, again, this is my opinion, but that's what I think happened. But because the Eritrean government doesn't say a lot, and like we just speculating things. But yeah, it is fair answer. Mike, do you have any other question?
Yes, as you can see, I'm in the car now. I've switched places, but I want to say, as always, thank you very much, Thomas, and your family, and you, and always been supportive of our Eritrean cause, and you do it very diligently. Your information is always accurate and also very reasonable, and I appreciate you coming on the show, as well as Solo Media for allowing us to be on here. Hopefully we'll come back more and do some more analysis. بتقرينيا يقنلنا كل خاتكم سماعتنا تخاتلتي ناي سولو ميديا بزيا كنزازماينا كبور غاشانا اتو توماس ماونتن غزيو هيبونا ابزي ممصو نمسغنو نكل خاتكم كا ابزي تكاتلو صنحكم حتو تحت نوركم مسود جنرال فاينا كلاتنا رحس أود أمتن رحس حدش أمتن يقولنا بزيا خنزازمينا تشاو صبو معالتي. See you later, Thomas.
Thank you for having me.
بجد قلتم زوجي دفين زركزل እግዚአብሔር ቃል ባለ ሁሉ ይሞ ለዛ ዘውድ እዚኣ ትንኪያ ወይ